Good point. Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, Christopher. When you do have examples of where the private sector is engaged, you do see some really good outcomes. I think there's a bit of misperception or maybe misunderstanding of the private sector's willingness to participate. I think more and more companies, particularly those that are purpose-driven organizations, and you see this a lot more, particularly in the corporate environment, the companies want to be more purpose-driven. And when you find companies like that, you'll find a more willing partner. And I think it's just understanding that there's a lot in the private sector that also want to address many of these same social issues. I mean, we've been in the plumbing business, 150 years. There's a tremendous amount of wealth and knowledge and experience that we have, and we are purpose-driven. So we want to commit to solving, sanitation issues and hygiene issues around the world. So I think just opening up that conversation and being willing to bring the private sector in more often, might be a good place to start with that. And when I think of the example in Lowndes County, that was us doing it on our own initially. We saw a New York Times article about, this community that had toilets, but no proper sanitation. And we've been addressing sanitation issues around the world, and seeing this in our own backyard in the US kind of was shocking for us. Right? And so we thought, we can't be, our brand here in the US, American Standard, we can't, we can't be, providing toilets and sanitation to, the whole United States and have this community in Lowndes County, Alabama ignored. So we flew down there on our own and started knocking on doors. And it took about a year for us to finally connect with the right government, NGO, and academic institutions. We heard from Sherry Bradley earlier, this is a problem been going on for 20 years. Yet we were the first private sector company to start looking at it. And I was kind of surprised by that no one had really asked either, right? Like it is, and I went to my first stakeholder.
I saw John.
Oh, Mohammed, you're unmuted.
Yeah, we saw, in our first stakeholder meeting down there, all the traditional government agencies and the right, academic institutions, but, being the only private sector company in the room, it was interesting that, in the 20 years or 30 years this has been trying to address, no one was asked. And like I said, there's innovation, technology, experience that we could lend to these issues.
One of the things I think I've found most fascinating recently about kind of the Lowndes County experience was that, as a policy professional based here in DC, I often talk about policy kind of at the macro level, like what happens at the national level that needs to take place. And, it's not, we get involved with subnational issues, but really my focus is on national issues. And what was interesting was, I guess through your engagement there, we've gotten some critical policy changes that, insights into policy changes that need to be made, both at the state level with, because of the technology that can be put into place, like allowing for surface discharge, which isn't allowed by the state, regulations. And then also both at the national programming level where, some of this, by just coming in and putting in like water efficient fixtures, into the same project where you're providing these, sanitation interventions, you were improving affordability for the project. Families were saving on, their water savings for the family. They saw that in real dollar on the utility bills, which then helped, more than offset the cost for this monthly maintenance fee for that, particular example. And so at a national policy level, being able to include in our, program funding, for like water efficient, some of these other things that the federal funding didn't include, and necessarily, we need to expand into those areas too, because it's, helps to holistically address it.
Yeah, we didn't necessarily think of the individual's water saving bill, right? Like how much water they were going to save. We knew water was the challenge, right? That's why many of the systems weren't working. And for us, when we joined the team down there, we thought, we make water efficient products, so let's put those in people's homes so that there's at least less water going out, right? I mean, that was the challenge in putting more water into these systems, because it just didn't percolate and get absorbed through the system. So, and now Sherry and the team finding a way to address the policy issue at a local level really now makes the solution much more viable for more people, and it actually makes it more sustainable. So we can do, I think she said 100, 150 homes. Now we're able to do something like that, because we had a lot of innovation, but the regulations were preventing it. Now we found innovation that can work, and instead we focus on the policy issues to change the policy to allow the innovation to work. Now we have a system that can meet the needs of the people there.
I'm curious to bring in Heidi into the conversation, if you're willing to join in, Heidi. If it's the Heidi that I'm thinking of, she's an official with EPA who largely focus on decentralized waste issues.
I am. Hi everybody.
Heidi, do you know? And I'd love to hear an introduction from Mohammed as well. Troy is with the American Standard. I'm not sure if you or Elixir Corporation, and he's oversees their kind of global policy efforts. And Heidi, we work closely with as an MOU partner into the EPA's decentralized, wastewater partnership.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are just so many different ways you can kind of slice and dice the issue, right? I mean, it's, I guess I just want to throw out a couple of comments. Just more recently, I think the funding and financing are one aspect of making systems available, or improving systems to where it's needed. I'll just share kind of with respect to internal EPA conversations, getting asked a lot more from higher management about the concept of responsible management entities in terms of what role they have in providing financing and funding. In other words, I think, I was listening in on the session earlier today in response to, some of the people who have commented throughout the US, whether it's Navajo or other, parts of the US, where the government just comes in and, doesn't really talk or ask, but sort of just comes in and says, this is what you need and the systems, etc. I think that there's an increasing awareness for the federal government that it's not just about coming in and solving a problem. It's not just about providing the money to install the systems, but that there is more of an inherent responsibility on, if the federal government's involved, to really ensuring that the systems are appropriate for the location, and even more so that there is some mechanism to maintain the systems, because I think you don't have to dig too far into Loudoun County to understand the history there of just putting in systems and walking away, and then they fail within a year, or they're not appropriate to the soil, etc. And so I think that we're starting to see at a finite level some communities and locations where they have combined the resources from a federal level, but done the legwork at a community level to really get homeowners engaged and involved, and then really designed a responsible management entity that works for that community. So I just say that with regard to, there's a lot of legislation that's still pending. There's a lot of discussions on, further use or expansion of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund or other loan programs that might become available. But I think that, what I'm seeing is really kind of a need to be responsible sort of A to Z in what we make available, how we make it available, and ensuring that the communities and the systems are really set up to succeed.
I think you bring us some interesting insights. And, one thing I guess I've been curious about as I've engaged with EPA, through this MOU partnership is that, at first blush, there's this, at least from industry's point of view, there's perspective of, hey, as government and policymakers go to solve these problems, one, the process needs to be transparent, but I think it also needs to include voices from industry as well as, obviously, just the, even more important, the local voices, in coming up with a solution. They can't happen, in isolation. It really does require that partnership. I'm curious from an EPA perspective, from your national policy level, you've convened organizations for a number of years through this MOU partnership. And, I can't even remember how many years we've been involved. But it seems like I feel like we've seen a lot more action through that partnership in recent years as, some groups have become more vocal and have, helped to draw in, this wash access issue, and tie the wash access issue to the broader, septic and decentralized waste conversation. I'm kind of curious to hear your perspective on it. Do you feel that's the case?
I do. I think that it's been a combination of things. I think, there's been growth and outreach that's happened within the MOU partnership. I think that the addition of some partners in, the last 3 to 5 years has also expanded that focus. And then added to which there's certainly been a number of articles in the mainstream media that have brought this to light. And then, our own political leadership within EPA, both within the Office of Water and our administrator have, shed a light on these particular issues. So, I think this is our time to really take a deeper dive into addressing and, kind of really spearheading approaches. I do, I do see with some of the current efforts that are going on, whether it's Cape Cod or the Florida Keys or in Alaska, I think what makes it sort of quote unquote difficult to solve is also the key to our success. And that is that really every area requires its own special solution. This is not a cookie cutter come out with a federal document of an SOP on, how to solve the decentralized issues throughout the US. This is, it's very site specific as to what will work. And that's for any of a number of reasons. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just, the nature of the problem. So, I think that kind of our strength then in numbers and in the conversation is to really look for how we can apply those lessons learned. What are some key components of success? And also being realistic about timetables. I mean, when the effort in the Florida Keys is not well published, but I would, in my conversations with the Florida Keys Aqueduct Authority, I want to say, there was 3 years of just community level meetings where they had a strategist, convene conversations at the local level to really have input from homeowners to address their concerns and to design an approach that really worked for everybody. So, it doesn't happen overnight. And I think being realistic about timeframes is another critical component that we have to really educate up, as we pursue some of these projects.
That's a great point. And Carol, I know we're a small group here, so feel free to join in the conversation in any way you'd like as well.
Thanks.
You're welcome to give an introduction if you'd like.
I'm interested. I'm interested in IAPMO's We Stand code and the progress of that. And maybe we can talk at another time.
Perfect.
Send you an email next week.
I'm always happy to talk about that topic.
Oh boy, it's great stuff, but we are looking for communities that have adopted it. I live in a county on the Olympic Peninsula, extremely rural, and we cannot meet our housing needs because of the cost of sanitation and failing septic. So we're looking at every aspect of gray water and dry systems. But
well, I'll make a note to follow up specifically on that, because I know that's going to be some very targeted questions.
Thank you. Next week, would that be all right? Good. Thanks.
That'd be great.
It's great.
But Carol, I think you bring up a great point. And actually, I thought it was something that kind of came out of even our session between, Joanna's presentation on unhoused communities, and then, talking about some of these, more, remote and, some of these, Aboriginal or Native populations, that we've heard kind of throughout the sessions this morning. I mean, it's going to take very different solutions, even as Hailey was pointing out, even within just the septic issue, the decentralized waste issue, it's going to take very, very different interventions. And what's interesting to me, I'm always fascinated by, working on both the developing country and in the developed world, is that when we talk about water sanitation, it's a whole different group of policy stakeholders than those who are really working on, we're in buildings, for example, or on decentralized issues. Oftentimes in the developing context, they're dealing with the Ministry of Water. Whereas when I go in and deal with WASH issues, I'm dealing with the National Standards Body and the Ministry of Public Works and Housing. That's, our primary target for, and, it's different stakeholders. And,
yes,
but I think it's interesting. So we as a group here have to come up with kind of a call to action of where the role of the private sector can engage on this issue. And one of the,
there's
I guess,
tremendous business opportunities in our county for this. Tremendous.
There is, and even in the developing world. I mean, our big theory of change is that you got to have an industry to support it if you want to provide water and sanitation services sustainably, or into the future. And so how do we better make that tie-in of, as we're providing direct aid to these communities, either through a government program or an NGO coming and doing that work, how do we lead in so that eventually industry and market, forces can take over? And, the program, and there's skilled people, there's products, there's, these things can be provided sustainably. One of the takeaways, I think, as I've discussed the issue that I'd love to propose to the group that we put on our call to action, is that one, private sector has a role to play in drawing attention and political will, to the solution. It's a whole different conversation, at least in DC, or even on the local level, when you're dealing with the mayor, when you have a corporation that comes in to talk about an issue versus an NGO. I mean, it is. There's different money, there's different political spend, and obviously welcome other people's insights. Feel free to disagree with me. The second one I'd love for us to consider doing, and we can wordsmith this, Kristen, is that going back to the policymakers should really go through a transparent solution process that brings in obviously the local community voices, but also includes industry at the table. I think too often unless industry, like Troy, like as you were saying, unless you were just proactively kind of injecting yourself, it never would have, I don't think it would even occurred to Sherry Bradley in Alabama, as wonderful as she is, to reach out to you guys and to get you to be a part of the solution. But now looking at that project, the success down there in Lowndes County is really the Lixil success story, in a lot of ways. You've been able to come and
tapped into, technology that we are aware of around the world, right? We brought, Japan innovation to Lowndes County, Alabama.
Absolutely. And, that's not resources they wouldn't have been aware of to ask those questions. Yeah. So maybe I start us off with those two, potential calls to actions, and I'll stop talking now.
I just add, Christopher, maybe to your first point about the private sector industry. I mean, yeah, we can help on the policy and the will, but there's also what I just touched on, which is, the experience, technology, innovation, R&D capabilities those are all things that we have in-house that could be leveraged in this as well, if we're just included or invited, to have a seat at the table. It's beyond the influence we could have on policy. It's also just leveraging our own capability and expertise.
I think it's absolutely right. I'm typing some of these right now into our potential call to actions. Any other thoughts just on those those points, and maybe how we can better frame them?
Okay, the private sector speak out, that's fine. As far as business creation and job creation, it can scale from extremely local, extremely decentralized systems to larger ones, can it not?
Absolutely. And I apologize, I'm getting notes. Our conversation's gone by too fast. We have to go back and join the main session now.
Oh, okay. All right, see ya.
We'll talk to you guys soon.
I apologize, Chris. The formatting's not working well with me, but those were some of the notes for the call to action I have for you.
Perfect. I think this is great. I'm
Okay.
going to slip over there now.
Okay. All right. Thank you.